In this video, we will go over quadrant reference angles, and we will also use some trig applications. And so just to get started, so this quadrant right here is represented by 1, this by 2, this by 3, and this by 4. And this point right here would be represented by like 0 degrees or 360 degrees. This point right here would be represented by 90 degrees, this point by 180 degrees, and this point by 270 degrees. Now the reference angle will be useful for the various quadrants. So let's say we have 157 degrees. Then we're in quadrant 2. And these are the reference angle formulas. So the reference angle will be, for quadrant 2, 180 degrees minus our angle measure, 157. So the reference angle for this will be 180 degrees minus 157 degrees is equal to 23 degrees. And we will solve some concrete problems. So here are 6 problems, and we want to determine the reference angle for the following. And so if you want to pause the video here and attempt these problems, feel free. So 150 degrees. So we are in quadrant 2, and the reference angle will be 180 minus 150 degrees, so 30 degrees. Next, 240 degrees. We will be in quadrant 3. So we would have 240 minus 180, which is 60 degrees. Next, we have 135 degrees, which will be quadrant 2. So 180 minus 135, so 45 degrees. Next, 330 degrees will be quadrant 4. So 360 minus 330 is 30 degrees. Next, 45 degrees is quadrant 1. And so the reference angle will be the same, 45 degrees. And finally, 225 degrees will be quadrant 3, and so it would be 225 minus 180, which is equal to 45 degrees. Now this is going to be very useful for trig problems. And so there's one more step. So this quadrant right here is positive for sine, cosine, tangent. This quadrant is positive for only sine and negative for cosine and tangent. This quadrant is only positive for tan and negative for sine and cosine. And this quadrant right here is positive for cosine and negative for sine and tan. And so there's a mnemonic. All students take calculus. Everything is positive. Sine, cosine, tangent. S, only sine is positive. T, only tan is positive. And C, only cosine is positive. And this right here is useful for common 30, 45, and 60 degrees for sine, cosine, tangent. And now we will solve another 6 problems. So what is sine 150? Cosine 330. Sine 240, sine 45, cosine 225, and cosine 135. And if you want to pause the video here and attempt these problems, feel free. So sine 150, so what is our reference angle? So we are in quadrant 2, so 180 minus 150, so 30 degrees. And so we are in quadrant 2, and quadrant 2, sine is positive. So sine parentheses 30 is equal to 1/2. 1/2 because sine 30 is 1/2. So this is also very important for you to memorize. Next, cosine 330. So what is our reference angle? So we are in the 4th quadrant. So 360 minus 330 is 30 degrees. And the 4th quadrant, cosine is positive. So we have cosine 30 degrees is this value right here. Next, sine 240. So what is our reference angle? So we are in the 3rd quadrant. So 240 minus 180 is 60 degrees. And the 3rd quadrant, only tan is positive. So we have negative sine parentheses 60 degrees. And so we would get negative the square root of 3 divided by 2. Next, sine 45. So our reference angle is the same. So 45 degrees. And everything is positive. Sine, cosine, tangent for quadrant 1. So we get positive sine 45, which is the square root of 2 divided by 2. Next, cosine 225. So we are in quadrant 3. So the reference angle will be 225 minus 180, which is 45 degrees. And quadrant 3, only tan is positive. So we have negative cosine parentheses 45 degrees, which is negative the square root of 2 divided by 2. And finally, cosine 135. And so we are in quadrant 2. So we have 180 minus 135 is 45 degrees. And with quadrant 2, sine is only positive. So we have negative cosine 45, which is negative the square root of 2 divided by 2. And that's pretty much it for this video.